Hello and welcome to this video on commentary and suggestions for the rewrites of the exemplification essay. In looking over and grading your papers, I found a number of comments that I wanted to make, but they all seem to revolve around the same issue, which is that a lot of you didn't really read the instructions very carefully. And if you did read the instructions, you did not, um, well, you did not execute them in the spirit in which they were intended. So what I'm going to do is simply go through the assignment again. Um, be very clear anytime that you have an assignment exactly what it is that your instructor is asking you to do. In this case, I'm asking you to write about um, three, and notice it's very important here, three common practical virtues. So, a virtue like integrity, as important as that might be, I don't see that as being practical because I don't see integrity manifesting itself in particular situations. I see it as being an explanation for a set of behaviors. Think small with this assignment. Really, all the assignments in this class, think small, because what I'm finding and what I suspect is that writing about for students, writing about big, grandiose topics, writing about the most important virtues, faith, or whatever the case may be, really disguises the fact that when it comes down to it, most students don't really feel comfortable writing about specific things, which is why, since that's what academia is going to ask you to do, why I'm making you do that in this class. So, please, three common practical virtues, nothing difficult. What is a good life? I don't know that there were many of you who even attempted to write about what a good life was, which was the instructions for the introduction. After all, there's no point in explaining virtues that lead to a good life if you don't provide the reader with what that life is. Look, I've tried to be as specific as possible. I've given you various examples, financial security, so that you don't suffer continual anxiety, close supportive friends, children, perhaps. There are a lot of possibilities. But I'm not asking you to write about a fantasy good life. I'm asking you to write about what life looks like for your neighbor who is living a good life. When you see him living his life, what is around him? What is involved with him or her? A practical virtue. Let's get back to this virtue issue here. Okay. Um, the more complicated or abstract your virtue, the more difficult you're going to have, the greater the difficulty in writing about it. Okay, I like what I've written here. These are virtues that we use to solve the kinds of problems that we run into at the store, at school, at home, and among our friends. If you're going to have a good life, you have to first get through the day. These are the kinds of virtues that I'm talking about. Without these practical virtues, having grandiose virtues like ambition or integrity are meaningless. Um, let's see. The following virtues are not allowed in this paper: faith, hope, chastity, love, any abstract virtues, virtues that are really almost impossible to give tangible examples of because they're ineffable. Okay. Um, so again, think about simple. Okay. I want you to write about something simple. If you can't write about something simple, then you have big problems. Now, Well, how am I describing a virtue? A virtue is a personal quality that an individual possesses within himself or herself, which leads or guides the individual towards goodness. It is part of one's being and not external to one's person. So, friends or a hobby, these are not virtues. Again, it's a quality you possess regardless of your external conditions. So your social status, your race, your genetics, cultural background, location, none of these things should affect that. So in one instance, there was one student that wrote about financial responsibility, and the example very clearly suggests that this is not a virtue for everybody. It's not even a virtue for most people. Only a few people can have this virtue because only a few people have the kind of money necessary to the um, execute the virtue as he writes about it in the example. Again, friends, money, family, education, while all of these are important, these are not virtues. Just emphasize this that a principal virtue is simple and common, right? Courage, patience, perseverance, generosity, right? Even generosity is a bit iffy. There are others, but these are the ones that every day we call upon to get us through difficulties with friends, family, at work, at school, etc. This is very important. The virtue that you select has to be beneficial to the person who has the virtue. This needs to be shown in the example as well. Generosity is a very difficult virtue to write about because we like to think of it as a virtue because you're not getting something out of generosity. If that's the way you feel about generosity, don't write about generosity. There has to be something that you receive. And that thing can't be a good feeling. You can't show a good feeling. You can only say to somebody, and it creates a good feeling. Remember, the examples are here to convince. You have to assume that the writer or the reader at face value is going to hear you say, or going to read you say, you need to be generous in order to have a good life. His initial response would be, why would I want to be generous? I want to keep all of my money. I want to keep my things. I don't want to give things away. I want to be giving money to bums. They deserve what they are. They've deserved their state. Right? And if you say, well, if you do give things away. If you are generous, you'll get a good feeling. And his response may very well be, I don't want a good feeling. I'm not interested in a good feeling. I want something I can hold in my hand. These are the kinds of things you have to think about when you're writing to someone who's not you. Now, again, the introduction needs to describe a good life, as I've already talked about. Let me emphasize this throughout the paper, and I'm not surprised, but throughout all the papers, I found the repeated use of you and I. You are not allowed to use you at all. You does not belong in any academic paper. I does not belong unless you are talking about yourself as an example. If you are going to say that courage is important, and then you say, for example, I once had to give a speech in class and I was terribly scared. Well, using I in that situation is very important. You need to use I. But you don't use I when you say things like, I think that three virtues that are essential for a good life are blank, blank, blank. I know that you feel that way because your name is on the essay. What you've got to realize, though, is that every time you use I, every time you say I think, I feel, I believe, you look less and less credible to a reader. It's like if you asked me about um, a particular class I should you should take. And I say, well, I think you might like that class. I mean, it seems to me that there would be a lot of possible things you would like about it. The more I say and I think, etc., the less convinced you are that I know what I'm talking about. The same thing is true in writing. In fact, it's even more true. Adopt an objective attitude. State things as though they are the case, not as though you think they are the case. The thesis statement needs to be the last sentence of the introduction. I don't want to see it at the beginning. I don't want to see it in the middle. I don't want to see it in the beginning and then again in the middle and then again at the end. It's just not necessary, and it's not good form. The thesis statement for this assignment should be nothing really more than this. 3 virtues essential for living a good life are patience, perseverance, and courage, or whatever virtues you selected. Why do I want it this simple? Because it's this simple. You want things to be clear to the reader. The more complicated your writing is, the more you are trying to dazzle with your language and with your vocabulary, the more obscure your points become. You're not writing for people to love your language. You're not writing to impress people because you're a writer. In fact, you're not wanting to show yourself at all in your essays. You want the reality that you believe is being expressed in these essays. You want that to be the focal point. It's like a painter painting. Generally speaking, when a painter paints a landscape, the painter is not in the landscape. The painter wants you to see the landscape, not the painter painting the landscape. Same thing with a photographer. If you're a journalist and you're taking a picture of a war scene, you don't want to be in the war scene. The war is the subject, not you. The same thing with writing. And the body paragraphs. Again, the topic sentence works like the thesis statement. Keep it simple. 1 virtue essential for living a good life is courage. Why do I want this? Because it has all of the information I need for the paragraph, for the paragraph to connect to the thesis. Essential for living a good life. And it has the subject matter of the paragraph, courage. Anything else is unnecessary. And again, you'll find when you have a task at hand, when you've been given a task, and I've given you a task, any extra work above and beyond executing that task is in danger of undermining the task. Now, this seems to be a problem for a lot of you, and I think I know the reason why. I'm going to try to address that here. The next sentence after the topic sentence, and it really only needs to be 1 sentence, it should only be 1 sentence, is explaining how the virtue works. I don't want a definition of the virtue. I don't need a definition of the virtue. I'm a pretty well-read individual, like everybody is, actually. There's not a single person that needs you to define what courage is or what patience is. Defining those words, as common as they are for a reader, is going to make the reader feel like an idiot. And the reader is going to blame you for that, because the reader is going to say, well, this person thinks I'm such an idiot. He's got to explain common words to me. That's, by the way, the reason why I don't encourage use of any kinds of definitions in essays, because though you may have been taught that strategy at a certain level, high school perhaps, it's a bad strategy. It's an insulting strategy. So I would encourage you to eradicate that from your bag of tricks. Now then, how does the virtue work? I explained that, I thought, fairly clearly in the video, in the resource book in Module 2. So I'm going to repeat. It should indicate how a virtue allows someone to overcome a specific obstacle in order to attain a goal. Each one of these virtues functions the same way. If you have a virtue that doesn't function in that fashion, you might want to get rid of that virtue because you may have something that's going to produce a poor paragraph. So, courage, as I always use. Courage allows a person to overcome fear in order to attain a goal. It is that simple. Courage doesn't do anything other than that. You can continue to write sentences repeating the same thing with different words and talking about how wonderful courage is and how it's just such a great, fantastic thing. None of that is necessary for me at that point as a reader, because what I need you to do is to show me. And any sentences beyond simply saying, this is how it works, is not showing me. It is, quite frankly, wasting my time. Now, I often say that the reader's time is very important. I'm going to emphasize that. I'm going to use myself in this case as the reader. It took me how many hours to grade all of your essays? And granted, it wasn't just sitting and grading and doing nothing else. That would be overwhelming. But I can say this. I spent, God, 3 hours a day. I mean, I spent probably about a half hour on every single essay, a half hour. And there were some essays where I just am reading repetition after repetition after repetition of ideas that are just there so that the writer can use certain fancy words um, or express sentiment. This is not a sentimental essay. This is not a personal essay. This is not an essay to entertain. This is an essay to convince through example. So that's your focal point. So keep it simple. Identify exactly how it works. And I'll also add this. If you can't tell me how your virtue works in one sentence, my guess is you don't understand how it works. And if you don't understand how it works, you shouldn't be writing about it. The example itself, and I'm going to repeat this again, needs to focus on the virtue, not the person. The person, and I don't care how much you love the person you're choosing to write about exists only to show the virtue. That person does not exist so you can say what a great, wonderful person this person is. Okay? No doubt that your grandmother, husband, father, whoever it is, just wonderful person. That's fine. This paragraph is not about their wonderful personhood. This paragraph is about a particular situation that they're in. They're merely a character. That's all they are. A character in some ways, a morality play. The situation is actually more important. Now, what do I need to know to set up the situation? Well, in some instances, I just need to know, in one I can remember, is someone was injured and was laid up off work and frustrated and had to use patience in order to overcome that frustration. Okay. Now I'm just pointing out that's all I kind of need right there. I don't need a lengthy thing about what time of year that person was out fishing and what happened when they were fishing and that they didn't capsize, but they ran into a tree and then they both had to be rushed to the hospital. And then you see what I'm talking about? At a certain point, when I'm getting all of this background information, I realize there's two things. I realize one, you're telling me a story about somebody. You're not focusing your attention on the assignment, which is to explain the virtue. So you've made the person the focal point and not the virtue. Two, you're wasting my time, wasting my time, wasting my time. I'm reading, and I'm waiting. When am I going to find out about this virtue? That's what you told me you were going to be telling me about in the topic sentence. The topic sentence says you're going to write about this virtue, and yet I'm reading all about this fishing trip. You see what I'm talking about? Don't waste the reader's time. Identify what it is you're trying to say, and then tailor the story to say it. Okay? If you are showing, when you're showing the virtue, I need to see the virtue in action too. You can't just say, but then he was patient and everything worked out. I don't see any patience there. So I have commented on a number of your papers. I don't see X, right? So if you're saying that there's courage, and I had courage and I did this thing. If I don't see you being courageous, if you just tell me you had courage, that's not showing me courage. Okay? Yes. Is that hard? Absolutely. That's the point of the assignment. The point of the assignment is to make you show something that is a little bit difficult. But I've given you all the tools in order to be able to show it. That's where you have to go, into the virtue. Oh, and of course the outcome too. And then finally the conclusion. Don't summarize what you've already written. I've already read that. Don't repeat yourself. Don't repeat your topic sentences. You can repeat in so many words the thesis statement. But otherwise, move on. Say something else. How might I develop or cultivate these virtues? What are the difficulties or the rewards of possessing these virtues, right? There are a lot of other things to say as a conclusion, as a takeaway, right? No, you may want to use the conclusion to assure the reader. Say, hey, look, just because you have these virtues doesn't mean everything's going to work out. That's true too, right? So look at this and reflect. Just to show you, this is a focus paragraph. Final virtue for a good life is patience. Patience is the practice of calmly waiting for something, even though it feels like the need must be met right away. Okay, notice identification, explanation, example. Begins with, for example, 3 years ago I decided to purchase my first home. This required patience. If you haven't bought a home, you might not understand. She's going to have to explain this. Waiting to find the perfect home also meant, sorry, I think I may have removed that, also meant waiting for the market's interest rate to fall. The first financing quote I received had a large interest rate of 9%. As eager as I was to buy, I knew I would waste thousands of dollars each year on interest if I were to buy at that moment. I patiently waited for the market's interest rate to lower. Searching for the perfect home took quite some time, right? That's part of patience. It was difficult not to settle and buy the first one that came up on sale. That's where patience really comes in. We are not rushing into something irrationally, right? Where's our thing? Eventually, the right home came on the market. I was able to purchase a home with an interest rate of 2.75%, much better than the 9% up here. Had I not been patient, I would have purchased the wrong home at the wrong time and potentially wasted thousands of dollars. That's it. Perfectly fine. Nothing in that story is about the family, how many people, how big the house is, where they're living. None of those things are important. What's important is only the information contained that illustrates the virtue and demonstrates what you say up here, calmly waiting for something, even though it feels like the need must be met right away. Okay. Um, so I'm going to stop here because I've talked way too much. I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know.